The 1992 Formula One World Championship was the 43th season of FIA Formula One motor racing. It featured the 1992 Formula One World Championship for drivers and the 35th Formula One World Championship for constructors, which were contested concurrently over a 16-race series that commenced on the 1st of March and ended on the 8th of November. Nigel Mansell finally won the World Drivers' Championship at the age of 39 and Williams-Renault won the Constructors' Championship. Mansell won the first 5 races of the season and went on to become the first driver in Formula One history to win 9 World Championship races in a single season. He sealed the championship at the Hungarian Grand Prix in mid-August, with 5 races still to run, becoming the first British driver to win the championship since James Hunt in 1976. Reigning champion Ayrton Senna won 3 races for McLaren Honda but could only manage 4th in the championship, with Mansell's Williams teammate Riccardo Patrese finishing 2nd and young Michael Schumacher 3rd for Benetton-Ford. This was the first season in which all teams had 2 regular drivers, a trend that has remained the same ever since. About team changes in this season, March completed a takeover of Leighton House Racing. Modena Park team designed a car for 1992, but had to cease operations before the season started, due to insurmountable financial challenges. After a 1-year spell with Lamborghini, Ligier signed a 3-year full-works engine deal with Renault. They received the same treatment as Williams, by utilizing the same engine specifications. Lamborghini moved on to supply Minardi and Laris, who collaborated with Venturi Automobiles. Judd supplied Team Lotus and BMS Scuderia Italia in 1991, but moved on to Brabham and Andrea Moda in 1992. Lotus was supplied by Ford, BMS received a 1991 spec Ferrari engine. Brabham's former supplier, Yamaha, moved to Jordan. After preparing the Honda engines for Tyrrell in 1991, Mugen Motorsports made their public debut as supplier to Footwork. Tyrrell moved on to engine supplier Ilma. During the season the Brabham team folded. After being in Formula One since 1962, Brabham went into administration 11 races into the 1992 season. Andrea Moda was expelled from the championship after 12 races, on the regulatory grounds of failure to operate a team in a manner compatible with the standards of the championship or in any way brings the championship into disrepute. The Fondmetal team ran out of money after 13 races and March left the sport after more than 20 years in F1. In this season about drivers, after Alain Prost was released from his contract with Ferrari before the 1991 season ended, the team attracted Ivan Capelli. 3-time world champion Nelson Piquet retired and Benetton attracted Martin Brundle, coming from Brabham. Brabham signed Eric van der Poel and Giovanna Amati, the first female F1 driver since Desire Wilson in 1980. Ex-driver Mark Blundell could not find a seat for 1992. Stefano Modena and Andrea de Cesaris switched employers, Modena going to Jordan and de Cesaris to Tyrrell. Jordan also signed Mauricio Gugelmin from Leighton House, while Tyrrell replaced the retired Satoru Nakajima with Olivier Groulard. Pierluigi Martini moved from Minardi to Scuderia Italia, replacing Emanuele Pirro making place at Minardi for debutant Christian Fittipaldi. Aguri Suzuki moved from Laris to Footwork, freeing a seat for newcomer and fellow Japanese Yukio Kotoyama. Ex-Footwork driver Alex Caffey moved to Andrea Moda, besides Enrico Battaglia. Andrea Chiesa debuted with Fondmetal, the team fielding a second car for the first time. During the season after 3 races, Giovanna Amati was replaced by Williams test driver Damon Hill, while he was still competing in the F3000. Before the Hungarian Grand Prix, Andrea Chiesa was replaced at Fondmetal by Eric van der Poel, coming from the defunct Brabham team. Unfortunately, Fondmetal folded just 3 races later. At March, Emanuele Naspetti left the F3000 championship while he was leading, to replace Paul Belmondo, and Jan Lammers made a surprise comeback when he replaced Karl Wendlinger for the final 2 races of the season. Lammers set a record by returning a full 10 years after his initial final race. Christian Fittipaldi was replaced at Minardi by Alessandro Zanardi when he crashed during qualifying of the French Grand Prix. After 3 races, the Brazilian returned. Ferrari promoted their test driver and ITCC champion Nicola Larini to the racing seat. He had helped develop their active suspension system, and when it was time to launch the car with that upgrade, Larini was awarded the drive. After just 2 races, Andrea Moda separated with both drivers and hired Roberto Marino and Perry McCarthy. In this season there was calendar changes. The United States Grand Prix was originally scheduled for the 15th of March at the Phoenix Street Circuit, which was to be the second round as a result of the return of South Africa, but was cancelled due to the inability to install more seats in order to attract spectators. This made way for the return of the South African Grand Prix. After a 7-year absence, the FIA lifted its ban on events in South Africa due to the end of apartheid. The race was held again at Killarney Grand Prix circuit, but there was a new layout compared to the last time they raced in 1985. The Mexican Grand Prix was moved from its mid-June date to March, and the Spanish Grand Prix was moved from September to May, while the Austrian Grand Prix, originally scheduled for the 16th of August, was cancelled due to financial problems, and the Hungarian Grand Prix moved up from the 23rd of August to take its slot. The European Grand Prix, originally scheduled for the 4th of October at the Jerez circuit, was cancelled. About regulation changes, the unleaded gasoline fuel became mandatory for all Formula One cars from the 1992 season onwards, as leaded gasoline fuel was deemed too hazardous for health. From the Hungarian Grand Prix, FISA mandated pump fuel only with lower octane, further reducing engine power, and stricter crash tests were introduced. In the 1992 season the use of the safety car was formalized. But let go now to discover a new epic, exciting and dramatic new Formula One season. The season started off in South Africa at the newly rebuilt Killarney circuit near the high-altitude city of Johannesburg, where Mansell took pole ahead of Senna, Berger, Patrese, Alesi and Schumacher. At the start, Patrese overtook both McLarens and Berger lost out to both Alesi and Schumacher as well. The order was Mansell, Patrese, Senna, Alesi, Schumacher and Berger. Mansell quickly pulled away from Patrese, who was under no pressure at all from Senna. Brundle spun off on the first lap in the Benetton and then retired with a broken clutch. Alesi was well behind Senna and had a comfortable gap to Schumacher, whom Berger could do nothing about. The pit stops left the order unchanged, and it held until Alesi's engine failed on lap 41. Andrea de Cesaris was 6th and in the points for 1 lap until his engine failed as well. Mansell won the race easily, with Patrese making it a Williams 1-2 ahead of Senna, Schumacher, Berger and Johnny Herbert. Mansell had also won the previous South African Grand Prix, held in 1985, in a Williams Honda. The cancellation of the United States Grand Prix on a street circuit in Phoenix, Arizona, originally scheduled for the 15th of March, left a 3-week gap between the first 2 races, and there was some controversy surrounding the next race in Mexico. The venue for this race, the Hermanos Rodriguez Autodrome in Mexico City, had an appallingly bumpy track surface, thanks to the circuit being located on a geologically active area. It also had a dauntingly fast final corner called the Peraltada, which was 180 degrees and banked. Although the banking had been eased from the previous year, making the corner slightly slower, the bumps were still disastrous, as Ayrton Senna hit a nasty bump in the S's and crashed into a concrete wall, receiving severe bruising. He was cleared fit enough to race. The Williams cars were 1-2 in qualifying in Mexico ahead of the Benettons and the McLarens, with Mansell on pole ahead of Patrese, Schumacher, Brundle, Berger and Senna. At the start, Senna blasted past his teammate and the Benettons, with Brundle getting ahead of Schumacher. The order was Mansell, Patrese, Senna, Brundle, Schumacher and Berger. Schumacher quickly passed Brundle on lap 2, and soon afterwards there was a big queue behind Senna, who was apparently having some sort of trouble. Schumacher got past on lap 7 and the rest were relieved of being stuck up when Senna retired with transmission troubles on lap 11. After the stops, Berger got ahead of Brundle only to be passed 2 laps later. Berger repassed Brundle on lap 36. Brundle got back ahead on lap 39 only for Berger to repass him 2 laps later. Brundle was back in 4th on lap 44 but retired with engine trouble 3 laps later, ending the battle for 4th. At the front, Mansell won with Patrese making it a Williams 1-2 again ahead of Schumacher, Berger, De Cesaris and Mika Hakkinen. For the Brazilian Grand Prix at the Interlagos circuit in São Paulo, the Williamses were ahead of the McLarens with Mansell on pole ahead of Patrese with Senna third in front of his home crowd ahead of Berger, Schumacher and Alesi. On the parade lap, Berger stalled and had to start at the back. At the start, Mansell was poor and Patrese blasted ahead of him with Brundle getting ahead of Alesi. The order was Patrese, Mansell, Senna, Schumacher, Brundle and Alesi. Berger had to retire after only 4 laps in the pits with electrical failure. The Williamses pulled away while Senna was holding the rest at bay. Schumacher was 30 seconds behind by the time he had passed Senna for third on lap 13. Brundle and Alesi passed him soon afterwards and Senna retired with engine troubles on lap 17. The stops brought Alesi closer to Brundle and Alesi made his move on lap 31. The two collided, with Brundle spinning out. This promoted Carl Wendlinger to 5th and he was there until his clutch failed on lap 56, as Thierry Boutsen collided with Eric Comas and forced Johnny Herbert off into the gravel at the Senna S as it forced both drivers to retire, but Comas managed to continue, just 6 laps after Brundle's retirement. Meanwhile, Mansell pitted while passing back markers and took advantage of subsequent clear laps, taking over first place when Patrese pitted after slower laps passing more of the back markers. Mansell then built a lead and won with a 29-second lead over Patrese in second, making it yet another Williams 1-2 ahead of Schumacher, Alesi, Capelli and Michel Alboreto. Mansell was on pole once again in Spain at the Catalunya circuit in Montmello ahead of Schumacher, Senna, Patrese, Capelli and Brundle. At the start, in torrential wet conditions, Patrese got by Senna and Schumacher while Alesi sensationally climbed up from 8th to 3rd. The order was Mansell, Patrese, Alesi, Schumacher, Senna and Capelli. Brundle retired yet again after spinning off on the main straight with a clutch problem by lap 5, meaning it was his 4th consecutive retirement. Schumacher attacked and passed Alesi on lap 7. Senna tried to do the same but tipped Alesi into a spin, putting the Frenchman behind Berger and Capelli as well. By now the rain intensified, and Patrese spun off on lap 20 while trying to lap a back marker. This put Mansell ahead of Schumacher, Senna, Berger, Capelli and Alesi. Mauricio Gugelmin, as the only Jordan in the race, and lapped by the McLarens, had spun into the pit wall at lap 25. During the pit stops, Alesi got past Capelli and began to charge up through the field. He cruised past Berger for 4th and began to attack Senna for 3rd. He wanted to attack Schumacher as well and was in a hurry. The pressure was so intense that Senna spun off with 2 laps to go. At the same time, Capelli spun off as well. Mansell won again from Schumacher, Alesi, Berger, Alboreto and Pierluigi Martini. At the San Marino Grand Prix at the Imola circuit in Italy, the Williamses were still well ahead of the McLarens and the Benettons, Mansell taking another pole ahead of Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Brundle. At the start, Patrese attacked Mansell but Mansell kept the lead and Schumacher got ahead of Berger to take 4th. The order at the end of the first lap was Mansell, Patrese, Senna, Schumacher, Berger and Brundle. As usual, Mansell was pulling away from Patrese as the two of them began to pull away from the field. Capelli in the second Ferrari spun off into the gravel trap on lap 12. Schumacher was pressurizing Senna but it was he who made the mistake first, spinning out into retirement on lap 21 with the result of rear suspension damage after clipping the tire wall. Alesi was planning to go without a stop and so after the others stopped, he had climbed up to 3rd. However, he was soon under pressure from the McLarens of Senna and Berger. Senna went ahead at Tosa on lap 40, but Berger tried to follow him through and Alesi lost momentum and spun towards Berger, taking both out. Mansell made it 5 wins out of 5, with Patrese making it 1 more. Williams won 2 ahead of Senna, Brundle, Alboreto and Martini. In Monaco, the Williamses were again dominant, with Mansell taking 6 poles in 6 with Patrese beside him, Senna 3rd, Alesi 4th, Berger 5th and Schumacher 6th. At the start, Senna got ahead of Patrese while Schumacher took Alesi and Berger into the first corner. However, Alesi took 4th back at Mirabeau and then the race settled down. The order was Mansell, Senna, Patrese, Alesi, Schumacher and Berger. Patrese began to attack Senna but then began to drop back with gearbox troubles. On lap 12, Schumacher tried to pass Alesi and the two collided, and an electronic box was damaged in Alesi's car, with Schumacher getting ahead. Alesi continued to stay 5th for another 16 laps before the damage forced him to retire on lap 28. This promoted Berger to 5th, a place which he held for just under 5 laps before he had to retire from gearbox troubles. On lap 60, Alboreto, just about to be lapped by Senna, spun in front of him and Senna lost another 10 seconds. Then, there was a loose wheel nut in Mansell's car and Mansell had to pit and rejoined behind Senna. He closed the gap quickly, but with overtaking being extremely hard, Senna was able to legally block every move that Mansell made. Senna won from Mansell, Patrese, Schumacher, Brundle and Bertrand Gachot. There was a change in Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada, with Senna taking his 61st career pole position ahead of Patrese, Mansell, Berger, Schumacher and Herbert. At the start, Mansell got ahead of Patrese and behind them Brundle was able to get by Herbert. The order was Senna, Mansell, Patrese, Berger, Schumacher and Brundle. The race settled down for the first 14 laps, but then on lap 15, Mansell attacked Senna at the final chicane and hit a curb, pushing his car into the air. It landed nose first into the gravel and spun back onto the track. Mansell claimed that Senna had pushed him off the track. He was out and this forced Patrese to slow down, and suddenly Berger went through to second. Senna then began to pull away from the field and the stops changed nothing. Senna still led Berger, Patrese, Schumacher, Brundle and Herbert. Herbert went out on lap 34 with clutch troubles. Senna lost a certain victory when electrical failure put him out on lap 38. Behind them, Brundle passed Schumacher for 3rd and this became 2nd when Patrese gearbox failed on lap 44. However, Brundle only lasted for 2 more laps before he retired with transmission trouble. Berger won from Schumacher, Alesi, Wendlinger, De Cesaris and Eric Comas. The Williamses took the front row at the Magny-Cours circuit in France ahead of the McLarens, with Mansell on pole ahead of Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Alesi. At the start, Patrese got by Mansell while Berger got ahead of Senna and Brundle was able to pass Alesi. At the Adelaide hairpin, Schumacher tried to pass Senna but instead hit him, taking Senna out and forcing himself to pit. Meanwhile, Patrese and Mansell were side by side but Patrese kept the lead. Patrese led Mansell, Berger, Brundle, Alesi and Hakkinen and then Patrese waved Mansell through. Nothing changed until lap 11 when Berger's engine failed. Soon afterwards it began to rain so heavily that the race was stopped. After some time the rain decreased and the grid formed up again. Patrese took the lead again with Alesi getting ahead of Hakkinen as well. Mansell tried to get past but Patrese defended and once again kept the lead. Patrese led Mansell, Brundle, Alesi, Hakkinen and Comas on aggregate. Patrese then waved Mansell through on track and soon Mansell got ahead on aggregate. It began to rain again and everyone pitted for wets, with Alesi going too late and dropping down to 6th. His engine failed on lap 61. Mansell won, with Patrese making it a Williams 1-2 ahead of Brundle, Hakkinen, Comas and Herbert. Thus, at the halfway stage of the season, Mansell was comfortably leading the championship with 66 points compared to Patrese 34. Schumacher was third with 26, Senna was fourth with 18, Berger was fifth with 18, Alesi was sixth with 11, Brundle was seventh with 9 and Alboreto was eighth with 5. The 66 points that Mansell had after the French Grand Prix would have been enough for him to have been crowned world champion even if he had scored no further points in the season. Patrese was the eventual runner-up with 56 points. In the Constructors' Championship, Williams were dominant, with 100 points and well ahead of the field. McLaren were second with 36, Benetton were third with 35, and Ferrari were fourth with 13. This Grand Prix saw, for the first time in the sport, the trialling of a safety car, in this case a Ford Escort RS Cosworth. Mansell took pole position at Silverstone in Britain, with Patrese making another Williams 1-2 ahead of Senna, Schumacher, Berger and Brundle. At the start, Patrese got ahead of Mansell while Brundle had a superb start, blasting by the 3 in front of him, and Schumacher also got ahead of Senna. Patrese waved Mansell through on the hangar straight with action behind as both Senna and Berger got ahead of Schumacher. Schumacher quickly recovered and passed Berger at Priory before the first lap was over. Mansell led Patrese, Brundle, Senna, Schumacher and Berger. Herbert became the first of the leaders to retire from 6th position in the leading Lotus with transmission problems on lap 32. Alesi in the leading Ferrari eventually went off the track with mechanical problems by lap 44. Senna put Brundle under pressure, but Brundle kept the place. The round of stops changed nothing, with Mansell leading from Patrese, Brundle, Senna, Schumacher and Berger. Schumacher then went wide at a corner, giving 5th to Berger. Senna only lasted until lap 53 when his transmission failed. On the next lap, Schumacher passed Berger, who was suffering from engine trouble, but still managed to cross the line just before it let go and finished 5th. Mansell took the win, with Patrese making it one more Williams 1-2 ahead of Brundle, Schumacher, Berger and Hakkinen. Spectators began to invade the track to celebrate his win even before the final lap had finished, and thousands entered the track following the checkered flag. The win saw Mansell overtake Jackie Stewart as the most successful British driver, with 28 wins to Stewart's 27. Mansell's record was subsequently overtaken by Lewis Hamilton. This Grand Prix also saw repeated trials for a safety car, first run at the preceding French Grand Prix. At Hockenheim in Germany, the Williamses were again ahead of the McLarens, with Mansell on pole ahead of Patrese, Senna, Berger, Alesi and home hero Schumacher. At the start, Mansell defended from Patrese while Alesi lost out to both Schumacher and a fast-starting Brundle. Mansell was leading Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Brundle at the end of the first lap. Mansell then pulled away from Patrese, who was doing the same to the McLarens. Soon the stops came and everyone in the top pitted except Senna, and the Benettons were planning to go without a stop. Berger had a slow stop and retired with a misfire soon after. The order after the stops was Senna, Mansell, Schumacher, Patrese, Brundle and Alesi. Mansell did not want to stay second and pass Senna to lead, with Patrese taking third from Schumacher soon after. Patrese was on a charge and smashed the lap record in his chase of Senna. He was right with Senna on the penultimate lap and tried to attack on the last lap. But Patrese in his attempt spun off into the gravel trap and was out. Mansell took his 8th win of the season ahead of Senna, Schumacher, Brundle, Alesi and Comas. By the time the Hungarian Grand Prix in Moghiorad came around, Mansell was 46 points ahead of Patrese and the Williams team were 77 points ahead of Benetton with 6 races to go. This was the chance for Williams to seal both titles and they were dominant, but it was Patrese who took pole ahead of Mansell, Senna, Schumacher, Berger and Brundle. At the start, Berger got by Schumacher and then Mansell lost momentum and Senna passed him with Berger following his teammate through. The order was Patrese, Senna, Berger, Mansell, Schumacher and Brundle. There was a collision on the first lap between Comas, Herbert, Boutsen and Tarquini who all retired on the first lap, before Van der Poel spun into retirement at the first corner on lap 3 as both Fondmetals retired after only 2 laps. Mansell passed Berger on lap 8 and set off after Senna. However, as hard as he tried, the combination of the small circuit and Senna's skills in defending meant that he could not pass. Alesi in the leading Ferrari behind the leading pack spun out with the rear wheels in the gravel trap by lap 15. On lap 31, Patrese made a mistake and went wide and rejoined behind Berger. 2 laps later, Mansell passed Berger to get back third. Then, a pivotal movement came on lap 39 when Patrese spun off. He rejoined in 7th, outside the points, which meant that Mansell would be the world champion if results stayed the same. However, on lap 51, Mansell had to go to the pits with tyre troubles and rejoined in 6th, just ahead of Patrese. Mansell quickly passed Hakkinen, but before Patrese, who was right behind, could take 6th, Patrese engine blew. He was out and would get no points. Mansell quickly caught and passed Brundle on lap 60 and 4 laps later, he was up to 3rd when Schumacher's rear wing broke, spinning him out and retired on lap 64. Senna, a minute ahead, made a precautionary stop just as Hakkinen passed Brundle for 4th. Mansell passed Berger for 2nd and now had a toehold on the championship. Soon afterwards, Hakkinen tried to pass Berger and spun into Brundle's path. Brundle was forced to spin to avoid a collision and both rejoined without losing places, with Hakkinen staying ahead. Senna won ahead of new world champion Mansell, Berger, Hakkinen, Brundle and Capelli. Now to Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium, and champion-elect Mansell took pole ahead of Senna, Schumacher, Patrese, Alesi and Berger. At the start, it was damp and Senna outdragged Mansell with Patrese getting ahead of Schumacher while Berger did not move. Senna was leading Mansell, Patrese, Schumacher, Alesi and Thierry Boutsen. At the start before La Source, Berger failed to get away and retired after an immediate transmission problem and put him out straight away. Mansell attacked and passed Senna at the end of the 2nd lap with Patrese following suit. Then it began to rain and almost everybody pitted for wets. Senna stayed out in the hope that the rain would stop, but it did not. He pitted late and rejoined down in 12th as Alesi went out with a puncture after colliding with Mansell at La Source. The order was Mansell, Patrese, Schumacher, Brundle, Hakkinen and Boutsen. Capelli suffered a dramatic engine failure on lap 26 as he went straight off into the gravel trap at Blanchiment whilst battling Herbert for 6th position. The track was beginning to dry and Boutsen spun off on lap 28. Schumacher lost 2 seconds after going off the track and stopped for dries at the end of the lap. However, Mansell and Patrese stayed out far too long, and when both pitted late, they rejoined behind Schumacher. Herbert eventually retired yet again with engine problems on lap 43. The Englishman would be classified 13th. Mansell tried to close in but cracked an exhaust and dropped back. Patrese suffered the same fate and had to hold back Brundle. Behind, the recovering Senna took 5th from Häkkinen. Schumacher took his maiden win ahead of Mansell, Patrese, Brundle, Senna, and Häkkinen. The Constructors' Championship went to Williams after their 2-3 finish. This was also the only race to have 18 classified finishers, the highest number of finishers that year. At Monza in Italy, Mansell was on pole ahead of Senna, Alesi, Berger, Patrese, and Schumacher. At the start, Mansell took off while Patrese got ahead of Alesi and Berger lost out to Schumacher, Capelli, and Brundle. Mansell led Senna, Patrese, Alesi, Schumacher, and Capelli. Mansell pulled away fast with Senna holding up Patrese. On lap 13, both Ferraris went out, Alesi with trouble in his fuel system and Capelli with electrical problems. Patrese then passed Senna but Mansell was already 10 seconds up the road. Then, everybody stopped during which Brundle got ahead of Schumacher. The order was Mansell, Patrese, Senna, Brundle, Schumacher, and Berger. Then Mansell suddenly slowed down and allowed Patrese to pass him. Then, on lap 36, he began to drop back with hydraulic troubles. Senna, Brundle, Schumacher, and Berger all passed him. He trolled round and retired in the pits on lap 41. Patrese led but then Senna began to close in. Patrese also began to suffer from hydraulic troubles and Senna passed him on lap 49. On the next lap, both Brundle and Schumacher found a way through. Patrese held 4th until the last lap when Berger passed him. Senna won from Brundle, Schumacher, Berger, the hobbling Patrese and De Cesaris. The Williamses were again ahead of the McLarens and the Benettons in Estoril just outside Lisbon with Mansell on pole ahead of Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Brundle. At the start, Schumacher was late firing up and started at the back of the grid. At the start, Berger got ahead of Senna. Mansell led from Patrese, Berger, Senna, Brundle and Häkkinen. Herbert in the second Lotus collided with Alesi on the first lap. Herbert eventually crashed out on lap 3 as Alesi in the leading Ferrari had spun off by lap 13, making it his 4th retirement in a row. Then it was the usual sight of Mansell pulling away from Patrese and the two getting away from the rest. The Williamses pitted early unlike the McLarens. Mansell had a quick stop and rejoined in the lead but Patrese had a problem with his right rear jack and joined behind the McLarens. He passed Senna quickly and set off after Berger. On lap 35, the recovering Schumacher took 6th from Alboreto. Soon after, Patrese was right with Berger, looking for a way through. Berger realized that he had blistered his tires and slowed down as he was about to go to the pits. Patrese was caught unawares, hit the back of Berger and had a massive crash. Luckily, Patrese was unhurt. Schumacher hit the debris and had to pit again, dropping back to 8th. Mansell took his 30th career win ahead of Berger, Senna, Brundle, Häkkinen and Alboreto. Before the race at Suzuka in Japan, Ferrari had dropped Capelli, who had a poor season, and replaced him with Nicola Larini. In qualifying, the Williamses showed their class, with Mansell taking pole ahead of Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Herbert. At the start, there were no changes at the front and Mansell still led Patrese, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Herbert. Senna did not last long, going out with engine troubles on lap 3. Guyard had crashed out in the second Tyrrell by lap 6. Berger decided to make an early stop and drop back down to 6th. Schumacher had gearbox troubles and retired at the end of lap 13. Herbert now inherited 3rd, only to go out with the same problems 2 laps later. Berger and Brundle, who stopped earlier, did not stop when the others did, and so the order after the stops was Mansell, Patrese, Berger, Hakkinen, Brundle and Comas. On lap 36, Mansell slowed down and let Patrese through before again speeding up and hanging on Patrise's tail. However, on lap 45, an engine failure ended Mansell's race. At the same time, Hakkinen went out with the same problem. Patrese won from Berger, Brundle, De Cesaris, Alesi and Christian Fittipaldi. For the season's final race on the streets of Adelaide, Australia, Mansell took pole ahead of Senna, Patrese, Berger, Schumacher and Alesi. At the start, Alesi had to hold off Brundle and there were no changes ahead of him. The order was Mansell, Senna, Patrese, Berger, Schumacher and Alesi. There was a collision at the start behind the leaders as Guyard's Tyrrell collided with the Dallara of Martini on the first lap. However, Mansell did not pull away as usual. Senna was right with him and tried to pass him on lap 8. Gugelmin had once again spun out and crashed in the second Jordan by lap 9. He went wide and Mansell retained the lead. The top 2 were pulling away from Patrese and the rest, but Senna could not attack Mansell. The gap stayed at less than a second. Then, on lap 19, entering the final corner, Senna crashed into the back of Mansell, resulting in both drivers retiring. Some claimed that Mansell brake tested Senna. Patrese was now leading under immense pressure from Berger. Berger tried to pass around the outside, but he too went wide. While Patrese did not pit, Berger pitted, followed 5 laps later by Schumacher. Berger rejoined for seconds ahead. Behind them, Brundle had got ahead of Alesi in the stops. On lap 51, Patrese, nearly 20 seconds ahead, coasted to a halt with an engine failure. So, Berger won with Schumacher close behind ahead of Brundle, Alesi, Bautzen and Stefano Modena. This race was remembered for being Modina's last Grand Prix and the only point for the Jordan team that season.